Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Leah Fishbein with Becker's Healthcare. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. We are very pleased to have Scott Becker, publisher of Becker's Healthcare, here to moderate today's question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space level, enter a question for staff, and clicking send. We're looking forward to your questions. In about a week following the webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenters. Mr. Pio is Chief Development Officer for SCOA. He joined the company in 2005 as a financial analyst and most recently worked as Vice President of Acquisitions and Development. During his tenure, Mr. Pio is responsible for the development of highly profitable ASCs that have been generated over $250 million in revenue. He is a regular contributor to industry publications and speaker at industry conferences. Prior to joining SCOA, Mr. Pio ran a knowledge and management information technology consulting division for a Fortune 100 company. Mr. Pio graduated from Brigham Young University with a degree in manufacturing engineering. Ms. Chappell is Senior Vice President of Operations with more than 25 years of experience in all aspects of ambulatory surgery center administration, including risk management, Chief Operating Officer, and administrator of 2 multi-specialty surgery centers. She also consulted in the development and remodel of 3 surgery centers. Ms. Johnson is a Senior Vice President of Operations with over 30 years of experience in all aspects of healthcare settings. Prior to joining SCOA, her experience includes OR nurse, risk manager, chief operating officer for a surgical practice, and most recently, 7 years as an administrator of a multi-specialty surgery center in Georgia. Ms. Johnson earned a BSN for Columbus State University and received her CASE in 2010. Mrs. Anka is Corporate Materials Manager for SCOA. Prior to joining to SCOA, Mrs. Anka worked in the ASC environment for 12 years. During that time, she assisted with the startup of an ASC and managed in the capacity of Materials Manager for 8 of those years, utilizing her extensive knowledge in contracts, compliance, and negotiations. Mrs. Anka studied at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and has a degree in microbiology. Jeff, I'll now turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much. We're really appreciative of the time that you're taking out of your busy schedules today to spend a few minutes with us talking about a topic that I think is near and dear to all of our hearts and to all of the hearts of every owner of a surgery center anywhere across this country. How we can squeeze more profits out of the reimbursement dollars that we get. As we all know, these reimbursement dollars seem to be dropping every year, and the supplies and the expenses that we have with running these centers seem to be going up every year. And so we thought that it might be something that might be interesting to all of you to talk a little bit about ways that we're seeing nationwide as ways that we can help improve the profits. A quick background on SCOA. We were founded in 1997 by 3 surgeons, 3 ophthalmologists, Dr. Brent Lambert, Dr. Tom Bombardier, and George Violin. We've developed or acquired over 70 centers nationwide. And truly, the secret to our success has been our outstanding operations team, the clinical quality and the financial performance that we've been able to achieve with our surgery centers. Next slide, please. Thank you. Today, while there are lots of opportunities to try and increase profits, what we thought we would do is focus on these 5 areas. If you have any questions for us, please feel free to type those questions on the side, as was mentioned earlier, and we'll try to leave some time at the end where we can actually address those questions and get the right expert on the call with you. So these 5 areas of expertise that we'd like to spend a few minutes talking about is staffing, scheduling, case volumes, billing and collections, and GPOs. So with that, I'll turn the time over for us to talk about staffing.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sharon Johnson. I will be talking about staffing today. I think it's one of the most important aspects at an ASC. You have to have the right staff with the right attitude to get the job done. We all know that job duties and responsibilities certainly need to be defined so that expectations are met in the ASC environment because it's much different than a hospital. Most of us who have ever worked in an ASC have previously worked in a hospital. So we know how the OR runs and what our job responsibilities are and what our titles are and who does what when. In an ASC, it's quite different. In an ASC, everyone has to jump in and be part of the team. Cross-training, flexibility, those things are key to a great staffing model because of the way an ASC runs. I think it's important that we employ a combination of full-time, part-time, and PRN staff that will suit the needs of your particular schedule and your particular facility. I'm going to skip down because staffing is so important to hire the right people. I think not only is the cross-training and flexibility very important, but you must have the right people. They have to be the right fit for the facility. They have to be the right fit for the rest of the team. And that's sometimes very hard to get, especially on your first pass. As we all know, people see that a job is available, they apply for the job, which doesn't necessarily mean that that person is right for that particular position. And if you can, and sometimes it's hard because we need to fill positions, if you can, I think it's important that you try to match the personality, match the skills, and the responsibilities to a specific job in the ASC, which means that you may have a great applicant who interviews very well and you think would be a great fit, but they don't actually fit the position that's available. We tend to fill those positions rather quickly because we work on a tight skeleton crew most times. But if you can do that, that is probably one of the most important things about staffing. When I interview someone, I like to watch their reactions. I like to gauge what I think their personality may or not be, which is also very difficult because I have many times made the wrong decision because people interview very differently than they actually work on the job. Interviewing is pretty tricky in my opinion. So you have to ask the right questions, like how do they envision themselves in an ASC environment? Are they self-starters? Do they like working on a team? Would they rather work alone? Are they autonomous decision makers? I think sometimes we have to dig a little deeper than the regular interview questions. So try to get creative so you can pull their personalities and their work ethics out a little bit more in your interview. That would certainly, it certainly has helped me to sometimes not choose the applicant who seems to be the most cheerful and the go-getter, because I've seen something in some of my questions that maybe they wouldn't work so well on a team, maybe they have a title that they think their responsibilities would not cross over into another area. I'm sure all of you have seen nurses who think they don't need to mop the floors and or do other things as well because they have a nursing degree. I certainly have experienced that in my career. But in the ASC, we don't do shift work. Everyone has to work until the cases are done. Everyone has to pull their load to get the cases set up. And I think it's very important when you're interviewing people that you explain that difference to them. And if they've worked in an ASC before, doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the perfect fit for your ASC. Every environment, every group of surgeons, their particular personalities, they're all different. So you have to be very acutely aware of your center, the kind of cases you do, the personalities of your surgeons, how they prefer staffing in their rooms. So it's a little bit more than just interviewing people and snapping your finger and hiring somebody to fit that position. I think if you try to interview a little bit differently and you are very observant as to the person and the personality they present, I think that you will find that you will get a good fit most often more than not. There are also Regulatory considerations. Each state has regulations that dictate what kind of licensed professional can circulate cases. This factors into your entire staffing model. You know, what kind of licensed professionals can assess patients? What kind of licensed professional do you have to have that to do your pre-op calls and your post-op calls, your discharges? So most states are alike in that they require RNs to circulate, but there are a few states out there that have a little bit different regulatory. So you need to always be aware of your regulatory requirements for your particular state. We also like to talk about, or at least I like to talk about, there's an ASC culture mentality. We often in the ASC world say, oh, they have the hospital mentality. And that goes back to, oh, I come in at 6:15, so that means I leave at 2:30. Not necessarily. If the cases are still going on, unfortunately, you can't just walk out the door. I think most professionals are certainly aware of that. Everyone works until the cases are done. I think that you have to build camaraderie. I think that builds a more cohesive team. You don't have to socialize exclusively with people in the ASC, but I think it's important that you bring in lunch sometimes and you celebrate people and the things going on in their life, their birthdays and birth of children or grandchildren, marriages. Those kind of things are important. The ASC environment tends to be like a small family environment, and fortunately that works well for ASC staffing. Surgeons expect efficiency when they come to an ASC, and they rely on us to turn over the cases quickly. They want to move as quickly as they can to expedite their daily schedule. Time is money to them. They have a lot of responsibilities. They make rounds at the hospital. They do consults. They do cases at the hospital that are not to be done in outpatient surgery centers. They probably have an office where they have to see patients. So we like to make their time work for them. Also, that being said, we like to make them feel special. If we're not at the top of our game in an ASC, sometimes the surgeons do not feel the need to step out of their comfort zone and travel a little further from their MOB, their office, or their hospital environment to come to a surgery center. So we have to be better. We have to be more efficient. We have to offer them something that they're not getting at a hospital. I often hear surgeons say, well, you know, I get free lunch when I operate at the hospital. So if that's important to a surgeon, guess what? We get their lunch. Sometimes it's not important to surgeons, but those little things are what keeps them coming. It makes them feel special. It makes them feel good when their cases go smoothly. It makes them feel good when their cases get started on time. So we want to be at the top of our game. We want to be the best in the city, in the county, in the area where we work. No other facility is going to be better than us. We also need to be cost effective. This is based on reimbursement, as Jeff said. The reimbursement seems to be declining, and the operating cost and the supplies, pharmaceuticals, staffing, everything else is going up. It's increasing. So you have to get your staff on board with this. You can't be in charge of all the cost effectiveness. The staff has to understand why it's important to keep those preference cards up to date. They have to understand why it's important not to take a preference card and open everything onto the field as the preference card has on it, because at the end of the case, the surgeon may not have used 90% of those things. So it's very important to get their buy-in. It's important to discuss operational costs with your staff. I think until you inform your staff of these things, they are totally unaware. In a hospital environment, when I worked in an OR, we opened what was on the preference card because that's what we were taught to do. And if the doc didn't use, 2 sutures that were on the preference card, they got thrown away. No big deal. That's the way it was. In a surgery center, it is so key to make sure that you're not wasting things. Those things obviously cost money, and every time they're thrown away, that's throwing money away. And our profit center decreases when that happens. So always inform your staff, make them understand, ask for their ideas. I think that their perspective is so important. It's different than mine or yours. I don't scrub cases anymore. That your staff that scrubs cases, circulates cases, pre-op, PACU, whatever they're doing, they have a different perspective than you do as an administrator or a business office manager. So it's important to get their input and see what kind of ideas they may have. The best ideas I've ever tried came from staff, not from me. And they appreciate that you would ask their opinion. So get those cheerful, highly motivated, super nurse, super tech people in your center, and then educate them about the center. Their buy-in is so important to everything. Their buy-in is important to cost effectiveness, time efficiency, camaraderie. So pull them in. They have to really understand that each team member is an integral part of the team. No matter what they're doing, I think it's important that each member understands that they're so important that we couldn't do it without them. And then they feel valued. I know when someone acts like they appreciate me, I certainly feel valued. If I feel unappreciated, I don't feel valued, and I get discouraged. I get disappointed. So we want to always make sure that our staffing is the best it can possibly be and that it suits our environment. Again, I reiterate, know your environment. You have to know what cases are going to be done at your center. You have to know what surgeons and their personality, and you have to know what staff fits those roles appropriately. Cross-training sometimes becomes an issue. If you're a pre-op or PACU nurse, or if you're a medical assistant and you're used to one particular field, one particular area, it's very hard to convince a PACU or pre-op nurse that they should cross-train in the OR. I know that my experience has been, if I wanted to be an OR nurse, I would have been an OR nurse. I don't want to do that. So we try to at least enhance their experience. Just give them some time in the OR. See if indeed they might like the OR. If they don't, then it's a disaster if you try to cross-train them. But the pre-op and PACU nurses certainly can change spots, which gives you actually a bigger roster for staffing when people have emergencies, when they're sick, when they're on vacation. If your staff is cross-trained, or the majority of your staff is cross-trained, then you can shift your staff around. It makes life so much easier when you can do that, and it's more cost-effective as well. Can I have the next slide, please? Next. Okay, so we will move on to case scheduling. There are two types of scheduling. Usually in an ASC, or in a lot of ASCs, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 10 or so, block scheduling was the way to go. I'm not saying it's not the way to go now, but I think it's very important that you tailor your scheduling to your surgeons and their liking. Without your surgeons, you don't need to tailor anything because they won't have a schedule there. So your block times are usually the preferred method of scheduling by surgeons because they have office schedules, hospital cases, and the block times are designated specifically to fit into their particular schedule, which is great, except it's not great when that particular surgeon has a block time, just say Monday. He's got a Monday morning block time. Sometimes he has 8 cases, sometimes he has 2 cases. So what does that do to your staffing model and your operating cost? It ties up that Monday morning scheduling block where someone else may because Friday was a long way away from Monday, might have an add-on case. But you can't put it in their block because the block hasn't been released, because Dr. A may have that block and he has one case on. Compact scheduling is a very efficient way to stack cases, and it avoids a lot of staff downtime. It also allows surgeons to schedule cases on a first-come, first-served basis. I have a lot of problem when I try to change scheduling to compact scheduling, because most surgeons will push back with, you understand, I schedule my cases according to where my block times are. And at the hospital, I have this block time. I have office at this time. I have to have this block schedule. But it's very hard sometimes to get all of your surgeons to be flexible when they are not going to use their block time. It would be nice if indeed you knew ahead of time. Most centers do have a policy that states 48 hours before the block time. If it is not being utilized, you can release the block time. Sometimes that gets you more case volume in, but sometimes it's too late to get that case volume in. If Dr. B called on Thursday and wanted to put 3 cases on Monday, but Dr. A had a block on Monday, even though he had no cases, then Dr. A probably said, okay, I'll just take them to the hospital if I can't get them on there. So you want to avoid that kind of issue. It's very difficult sometimes to avoid that. There again, that's when it becomes more important to know your surgeons, to know their cases, when they typically are going to schedule. When are they going on vacation? Do they leave for National Guard a couple weeks in the summertime? It's important that you are acutely aware of that, and your scheduler is aware of those things as well. Each center is different, has different surgeons, different types of cases, so you have to tailor your specific schedule to be the most efficient for your center, whether it be block or compact. Now, in some cases, in some centers that are struggling, that do not have physician support, we sometimes will compress the OR schedule into less days to save operating costs and to get the doctors to understand we're not going to string out cases Monday through Friday, 7 to 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and have staff waiting to do these cases. So it's very difficult. Sometimes you have to force your hand a little bit to get it done. It's hard to go from 5 days with morning and afternoon blocks and XYZ, 1, 2, 3 ORs, maybe 4 ORs, and compress it down. But if you have large gaps in your schedule, it is absolutely more cost effective to compress your schedule and maybe work 3 days instead of 5 or 4, whatever works for your center and your surgeons. And most surgeons that are partners at the surgery centers will understand the cost effectiveness. Doesn't mean they're going to be very flexible and they're not going to argue with you, but they do understand the cost effectiveness of compressing the schedule. You also have to know types of procedures and surgeon times. You schedule your higher acuity complex cases first so that your PACU times don't run into overtime hours. An example I can think of would be spine and neck cases have longer PACU times than myringotomies and cataracts. So you have to look at the big picture so your patient flow is not obstructed. You don't want to get bogged down in the PACU and they're holding cases in the OR. That's the worst possible scenario for all of us. So we want that flow to be smooth. So when your scheduler is scheduling cases, I think it's important to train the schedulers, even if they are experienced in scheduling surgery cases. I think it's important for them to walk the flow of your particular center so that they understand what the time consumption is for each stop, the pre-op, then the OR, then the PACU. It works much better when they actually are aware that they have gone through the patient flow process rather than just answering the phone or looking on the fax machine or getting an email and posting a case when a doctor says he wants it posted. We also don't want to do your complex cases in the afternoon, if at all possible. Again, the chances are your PACU will be working late, and this adds dollars to your payroll. Sometimes that cannot be avoidable depending on when your doctor's block is, but I think it's important that, again, we all look at the big picture. We want to schedule cases for the side of the procedure, right or left. If you have a doc who's a hand surgeon and he has 10 cases, I'm sure they're going to be right or left. Usually they don't schedule all rights or all left. So when you're looking at that, be sure that your rooms are set up for that. Usually hand surgeons, most of them are pretty expedient. So if they have 4 rights and 6 lefts and they're going to use 2 rooms, stack your schedule as you would for any other procedures, knee scopes. You want to put all your rights in one room, all your lefts in the other room. That way you're not moving equipment back and forth. Your hand table's not changing back and forth. Your your surgical assistant that holds your knee is not moving back and forth. That adds time to your turnover. And turnover time is something we are all proud of in a surgery center. Hospitals finally caught on after surgery centers took off and doctors complained that the turnover time is very important, that can make or break whether your physician comes to your facility or not. Now, I will say most hospitals, even now, still do not have the concept down as the surgery centers do. So let's be sure to always look at that. The other thing is patient recovery time. I think I touched on that a few minutes ago. Different cases take different recovery times. Although each patient is different, that is for sure. We want to be sure that we realize, like I said, cataract surgeries take less PACU time than necks or backs or knee scopes. Myringotomy tubes in kids take less time in the PACU, depending on the child, of course. The other thing I want to throw in, it's not on the slide, but I will throw in as a last outline, surgeon arrival time. This is very difficult. If you have a surgeon or several surgeons who schedule 7:30 cases, but in the whole history of them coming to your center, they have never been there at 7:30, they wander in at 8 or 10 after 8, it is important to have a conversation with this surgeon that you're going to change his time to the time he actually is going to start. Because you may need to slip in a case before that surgeon gets there. You don't want to lose a case when a doc has a quick little case because Dr. A has a block at 7:30, but you know he's not going to be there until 10 after 8, and he's going to eat that biscuit that you had to buy him because he likes biscuits before he does his cases. So it's important, again, know your surgeons. Know what times are realistic for them. If they get caught somewhere, if they have an emergency, if they're running late, we always like to advise them to please call us. Please let us know what's going on so we know whether to move forward with another case or whether we know you are going to walk in the room at any time. So that's all I have to say. It's a big job for anyone to do scheduling and understand it and do it appropriately for your particular center, as well as staffing. But I'm hopeful that I gave you a few tips that have worked for me and other people in the past. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Margaret Chappell, and I'm going to be talking to you about case volume and how to be smart about driving and increasing your case volume. There are a couple of things you need to take into consideration, and the first thing is to determine why your case volume is low. Is your surgery center in network or out of network? If it's out of network, it's probably more difficult for your physician offices to schedule cases. So you may need to help them. If it's in network, then you need to determine why they aren't scheduling at your center. And you could have a mix of those payers in your surgery center. I think most of us do. And Sharon touched on this earlier, is your turnover time acceptable? Are your physicians sitting around waiting for your rooms to turn over? Is your anesthesia group on board to help you move the patients through the center? Are they holding up turnover? Are you adequately staffed? Is your staff trained? Are they competent in what they're doing? Are they holding up moving cases through the center? One thing I've always found interesting is physicians searching for scrubs that fit. Make sure you have them. It takes 2 seconds to go into the men's or women's dressing room the day before, the afternoon before their cases for the next day, and make sure there are scrubs there. It's one more thing that makes it easier for them to do cases in your center. How about your instrumentation and your equipment? Is it old? Is it, low quality? Look at your technology and evaluate it. Do that semi-annually. That way you know that you're providing the best toys for your physicians. Evaluate the clinical competence of the surgeons. A lot of, physicians now are doing total joints and high acuity spine cases. What is their patient selection process? And how do we drive that patient selection process so that we get great outcomes in our centers? They'll usually share that information with you, and you can build on it. You may have suggestions for them. Evaluate your implant costs. Are you having limitations because of high cost on your implants? And is that giving the physician poor choices when they get ready to schedule a case? Is there somewhere that your physicians can get something to eat or drink? If there isn't, are you sending someone out to get them something? Sharon mentioned it before. Are you having a biscuit, a sandwich? We've got a cataract surgeon that can do 45 cases in a day, and he needs lunch, and there's nothing in the surgery center. So we make sure we send someone out to get actually whatever he wants. Not a steak dinner, obviously, but something to help them. Another thing you need to evaluate is competitors in the market. Also, divided loyalties. Does the physician own in more than one ASC? And are they getting better professional fees in the office than they are in the center? Are they driving those cases back to their office? And what are the politics in the community? Is the hospital putting pressure on the physicians to bring their cases there? Are they cutting off referrals to your doctors because they're operating in an ASC? Those are things you need to be aware of and evaluate so that you can help the physicians schedule the cases in your surgery center. The next thing I would really like for you to do is talk to your physicians. Get in front of them. Are they leaving your center happy, or are they frustrated and miserable? What is it that they actually need in the center? They'll tell you. Do they realize that their schedulers aren't sending every single eligible case to your center? If they're not, you need to have that talk with the physician. Is there any trouble with anyone on your staff and the physician? Any conflict? And last, you really need to go and visit your physician offices, it's always good to go in, sit down with the schedulers. Is there any trouble scheduling cases? We talked about the in-network versus out-of-network. Go into the office and try to help create education little slides, 2 or 3 slides that can help them. Try to always go with candy bars, some little tiny gesture that will make them remember you. And I always take brochures and consent when I go. Next slide, please. Next, I want to talk to you about billing and collection. And we'll start with patient responsibility. You need to be as accurate as possible in collecting your copays, your coinsurance, and your deductibles. Verification of benefits is probably one of the most important things you'll do. Always go back, refer to the contract. How do multiple procedures pay? That will help you determine what the patient actually owes you. Copays up front. It's always best to collect up front. It's much harder to collect after the case. So I always make sure my staff calls the patients ahead of time and informs them of their responsibility and what they need to bring with them on the day of surgery. If your patients find they can't pay the entire amount, suggest that they pay the balance by credit card, or do you offer some healthcare financing like Care Credit? I think there are several out there now. If they're unable to use either one of those, you can set up a payment plan. We attempt to get 50% up front and the balance within 30 days. Sometimes we're seeing these large balances now, and we spread those out over 3 months. You can also ask the patient to leave a debit or credit card information, and you can automatically charge that on a predetermined date, as long as you and the patient agree on that and put it in writing. If the patient can't pay anything on the date of service, refer the call to your administrator and the physician and try to reach a satisfactory agreement. There's always an outlier. Then I want to talk about write-off of copays, coinsurance, and deductibles. We do not write off copays, coinsurance, or deductibles for any federally funded program or balances if you're contracted with for non-payment by a patient. So make sure you follow that rule. The patient may qualify for discount or charity care based on the federal poverty guidelines. Make sure you have those. Make sure you have a policy in place to help determine if the patient actually qualifies. This may require getting W-2s, banking information, credit balances, and all collection attempts must cease if a patient files bankruptcy, and you cannot turn that over to collections. The next thing I would like to discuss is decreasing your bad debt. Your upfront collection is the best way to avoid bad debt. Bill patient balances as soon as the insurance pays, and then monthly thereafter. It's important to call patients when you're trying to collect. This gives you time to discuss the bill and answer any questions that the patient may have. It also gives you an opportunity to collect the payment by credit card if you haven't done so earlier, and then follow up with another phone call when the next payment is due. You need to have a policy in place that outlines the timeline from the first bill to when you actually need to turn the account over to collection. You need to be diligent and timely. So next we'll discuss out-of-network payments. There is something, and I'm not sure that all of you know this, but a maximum non-network reimbursement. It's a payment methodology that payers use for out-of-network providers. And generally they pay up to 140% of the Medicare allowable, which can have a significant impact on your revenue. So be very careful when taking out-of-network cases and evaluate what you need to, and make sure you have a good idea of what you're going to be reimbursed. Some payers will receive a request to accept a negotiated settlement, but it doesn't usually occur until after the service. So when you're entering, it'll be a couple of days or a couple of weeks generally before you get a negotiation. And make sure you know the terms of the patient's plan before you sign an agreement. And make sure that this is above the remaining out-of-network deductible, co-insurance, and the cost of the case. And you can also do post-service appeals. We found that many times that results in additional payments. Overcoming pre-cert and prior auth denials. Know the difference between prior authorization and pre-certification. Make sure you inquire about both when you're actually speaking to a payer. Verification of benefits is the first step, but you can't depend on that totally. You'll receive contradicting information quite frequently. Utilize the tools on your payer's website for services that require pre-certification, and review the medical guideline policies, NCDs, LCDs, before you perform the service for medical necessity. Request a retro appeal if one was not obtained prior to service, or if you receive a denial because a different code was filled, and appeal the denial if you need to. That's all I have, and I'll turn this over to Ellen.
Thank you, Margaret. So we're going to get into GPOs, and it's my experience that people will, if you ask anybody, they'll say, yeah, well, I'm on GPO. But if you ask them, how does it work? They're like, well, I don't know. I sign a contract, and I'm supposed to get contract pricing. So this is to kind of help you to visualize and see how exactly you get contract pricing. Now, we all know that the two biggest expenses in an ASC is your payroll costs and your medical supply costs. So your materials manager usually wears many, many hats. Which is a good thing because they tend to be a very valuable employee, and a bad thing because it doesn't necessarily allow them to be able to perform their job correctly. Where most people, some of you, will have a dedicated materials manager. Others will be, well, it's my tech, and my tech will, after they finish the OR and pick for the next day cases, then they'll run over to the desk, do a quick order, and off it goes. Which is great, and that does keep things going, but you can lose a lot of money that way. On average, when I go into an ASC and I'm just kind of going through their supplies and their costing, I can generally find between $20,000 and $25,000 in savings, because there are items out there that are not on contract or improper contract, and they're losing money. And I look at it as reimbursements have gone down, and they continue to go down, and all our medical costs continue to go up, And even if they're nickel and diming you, your costs are going up. So my feeling is if they're nickel and diming me, I'm going to nickel and dime them back for anything I can get on any contract. So if I could one thing I wanted to say is an average amount of contracts that are in your facilities will run from about 70 to 120. So just keep that in mind. You have a lot of contracts that are tied to your system. So there's a lot of avenues for droppage where the contract falls off. And so there's a lot of opportunities to kind of streamline and take a look and save. Can I have the next slide, please? So how does the GPO work? And how does the contract actually get implemented? So your material manager orders something that you haven't gotten before. And they will, identify it as, oh, I'm getting a high price on this. And sometimes the distributor will actually flag it. But your GPO, and it could be Vizient, it could be HPG, there's Premier, there's Novation, there's a bunch of them, there's a Marinette, or now it's Intelair. They will identify the supply that you're getting that isn't on contract. So they're going to reach out to you saying, hey, here's a contract for you, sign this LOC, which is the letter of commitment, and we'll get you on contract. So you say, great, I'm going to sign my LOC, I'm going to send it back to the GPO. The GPO will then take it and they have to send it to the manufacturer. And the manufacturer has up to 45 days to act on that LOC that you signed. So that whole time, you're overspending. You're not getting the advantage of the contract yet. So they have up to 45 days. They finally sign it. They send it back to GPO. GPO then goes ahead and notifies your distributor and says, okay, this center is now on contract for, we'll say ConMed. And they should now get, this is the pricing that they should get, and your distributor will go ahead and load up that pricing. At any point in time, because there's a lot of hoops for all that, for that one LOC to go through for you to get your contract pricing. And at any point in time, it could just drop for unknown reasons. You sent it to the GPO, they didn't send it off, or they sent it off, the manufacturer just didn't act on it. Everything goes back, goes to the distributor. Their contract department didn't load it up. So it's imperative that you continue to follow through. Hey, where's my pricing on this? How's that contract coming? Is it loaded up yet? If you're lucky enough, there are some distributors that are very transparent so that when you're on their website and you're looking at your account because you're going to order, that you can see what is my pricing, what kind of contract is in place. Not all of them do it. Medline is very good about being very transparent because you can see it right off the bat whether you're on contract or not on contract or what type of contract. McKesson does not show it up front. You have to ask for a report. Cardinal, you used to have to be able to request a report for them to show you anything. I haven't seen them lately, so I don't know what they're up to at this point. But it's the manufacturer will go ahead and dictate whatever tier you can go on. So if you're putting in an LOC and you say, well, I want a tier 3 because that's got really good pricing, they could say, no, you're going to go on a tier 1 and we'll review it at some other time. So it's very important to have very clear communication with your GPO. Your materials manager should have a very good conversation with them. They should be in touch with them pretty constantly because everything is tied up into that GPO. Everything is tied up into all that contracting and all that pricing. Let's see, what else do I want to say on that? GPOs are reliant on the distributor to send them the information on your usage. So whatever you're seeing is always 6 months behind because it's a 6 month increment that the GPO receives their information from the distributor, and it's on whatever your usage has been. So there's always a long lag time, which can prevent you from getting upgraded onto a better tier. So keep an eye on that. You would think that in 2018, they would get better at attaining more real-time history on your usage, and there are programs out there now that are allowing the GPO to get like a monthly reading on what you're using, so they can get on top of it faster. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. Do you know your distribution costs just off the top? Have you have an idea? Because it varies from vendor, it varies from distributor to distributor. It also varies from, like if you have a multiple, if you have different centers, one center can get one distribution cost and another center can get a sister center can have another distribution cost. So do you know it, and where are you at with it? Your cost on the distributor shouldn't really be any more than 7%. Lower is better. There are others that are much higher. So one thing to take a look at is, what is your distribution cost? One other thing you want to take a look at is your contracts. Is it a local contract, something that the distributor does in place of the GPO, or is it actually a GPO contract? You really want to know this, because there are times when you will be put on a local contract when there's which will be at a higher price, when there's a perfectly good GPO contract that's out there that you should actually be on. So keep an eye on that. Like I said, contracts can fall off at any time. Reasons one would be they expire and they just drop off. And it would be better if the GPO was much forthcoming with, here's the issue, you have a contract, you're coming off that contract, be prepared to sign an LOC. But they aren't necessarily very good at doing that. So you're going to want to be able to kind of look and see and verify, like, I have a contract and it's expiring in June, and I want to make sure I get that other contract right away. Sometimes it will just roll right into it, and sometimes it doesn't, and then bam, you've fallen off again. I would recommend that every year you want to take a look at what your tiering is on these contracts, especially if you've had exponential growth, and with exponential growth, you've got a whole lot more supplies that have been coming in. And because of that usage, if you've gone up at a certain point, then your usage may allow you to jump to a different tier that has much better pricing to it. So keep an eye on that. I want to just give you a couple of examples of what I've seen when I've gone into some centers. I've been working with a center in Massachusetts, and I happened to be poking through their supplies, and I had noticed one, which is a Baxter product, and I thought, this was pretty expensive. It's an interlink injection site, and the box of it was running at $463, and it turns out it wasn't in contract. And I looked, and there was a perfectly good Baxter contract out there. So I contacted the GPO. I said, send me the paperwork. I'll sign off on it. Let's get them going. So they sent it. I signed off, and I take a look into their distributor when I see everything's gone in place, and it went down to $356.44. I'm like, you would think that's $107 savings right there. It's like, oh, you would think that's great. However, they were put on the wrong tier. I requested a specific tier, and they didn't give it to them. And so in fighting with them, because I went back to the GPO, and I went back to Baxter, and I've been demanding, give me the GPO, give me the tier that I'm asking for. They gave me an access tier when there's a perfectly non-acute tier that I should be on. So finally, they've seen the light, they saw their mistake, and they said, yep, you got it, here's your tier. So with that one box that started at $463 has now dropped to $189. And that's just about a $5,000 for one item right there for that center. One thing you have to keep an eye on with like another example is how contracts will, you get them implemented, but how they can fall off. So I was working with a New York center, and they were not on contract with 3M. They should have been. Everything had been, put in place for them to get on contract. But for whatever reason, wherever it happened, they fell off. They stopped getting contract pricing. So it was identified, signed off the paper again, got everything initiated. And so in 3M, they ordered like a substantial amount, and they would see about a $12,000 savings through 3M. So I see that they're like, the contract is in place, they're running, their numbers are good, they got the proper pricing. And then I go back a couple months later to take a look at something, and lo and behold, their pricing has fallen off again. And now they're getting like a special pricing, which looks like a local contract. And so I called the distributor up, and they're like, well, we don't know. And I called the GPO up, and they're like, well, we don't know. So I called 3M up, and I said, what's going on? And they're like, well, we don't know, because in our system, they're on contract. So the contract fell off on the distributor side. I have no idea why, but that's what happened. And so I contacted the distributor and sent them all the forms and paperwork that 3M had given me to show, yes, this is still on contract. What are you guys doing? They got it back on contract, and I said, now, everything that they've overpaid because of you, credit it back. And they ended up having to credit, it was about $14,000 back. So keep an eye on your distributors. Make sure that they know that you're looking at the contract, because if they know your eyes are on it, their eyes will be on it better too. And they will be, they'll be better. They'll cooperate much more. I think that is about all I have. So.
Great.
I'm done.
I think, great. Now, let's get started with questions. We've done a great job here on the webinar. So Sharon, Margaret, Ellen, and Jeff, thank you so much. I've got a number of questions from the audience. Let me try and dive right into those, because we don't have that much time left. One of the speakers spoke about a way to gain additional money from out-of-network claims. Can one of you speak for a moment about that? I think the speaker just wanted to hear it again, or hear it more clearly, about trying to make more money from out-of-network claims.
That was me, Scott, Margaret Chappell. And I recommend that you, if what you're getting or what your reimbursement is not what you expected, you can always do a post-service claim, an appeal, and perhaps that will get you some more money.
Thank you very much. Let me ask another question that goes to staffing. What's the best way to manage staffing when there's a high degree of volume variability?
Hey, Scott, it's Sharon. Well,
Hi, Sharon.
Like I said, the most important thing to me, and the main thing, is that the people who are doing the schedules, who are constructing the schedules for day-to-day operations, and the administrator, the DON, whomever that happens to be, even with the office staff, that you're very aware of how many cases you have, what kind of cases. Is the case that Dr. A put on going to take 2 surgery techs and an RN to circulate? Is it going to take 1 surgery tech and an RN to circulate? Those are things that you have to know. You have to know your center. You have to know your surgeons, their habits. Otherwise, you will not be staffed correctly, and there will be some unhappy surgeons there. If you have a case where he needs 2 surgery techs and you have 1, that is going to be very annoying for that surgeon, and it's going to prolong his case time. If he or the one scrub who's running the Mayo has to take over the duties of another scrub who may have been holding a camera. So you, the scheduler, and everyone, including the staff, has to know what it takes to get a case done.
Well, thank you. We're at 2:00, but we've got a few more questions. Let me try and see if our audience will stay on and see if I can't get a few of you to answer a couple of these questions. So a next question deals with high deductible plans. High deductible plans are causing patients to have to spend more on self-pay, cash first from the customers. How is that affecting staff's ability to collect co-payments, and any ideas or best thoughts on making sure you are collecting from patients with regard to high deductible plans? I think that's a Sharon or Margaret question.
And actually, I think that's me, Margaret Chappell again, Scott. I think that you have to analyze and make sure that what you're getting paid is going to be more than the haircut you're going to take on the deductible. So you need to collect your deductibles, and as I said earlier, upfront is always best. And if you find that the patient can't pay the entire deductible up front, you can basically finance it for them. They can't put it on a credit card and they can't get approved for care credit or something else, then you can put it on a payment plan, try to get at least 50% up front, and then the rest in the next 30 days. If it's really high, if we're talking about a $5,000 deductible, that you just really have to work with the patient.
Certainly. Ellen, let me ask you a question about GPOs. How do you know which is the best one to contract with, and can you work with more than one, or are you stuck working with just one?
You can have a primary and a secondary GPO. Intelair is okay with being a secondary GPO. They always prefer to be primary, but they're happy to get anything. You've got, I'm thinking, Vizient would never be a secondary. I think the only one that I can think of is Intelair. And what was the first question?
How do you decide which is the best GPO for you to work with?
Yeah, you want to know what their buying power is. So you take Vizient. That has now become a $100 billion GPO, okay, which allows them to be very aggressive with their buying power and going after contracts. You have HPG, which is around a $55 billion company, and while good, they don't have nearly the buying, they don't have the clout as much because, they're not quite as big. Then you've got the smaller one like Intelair, and they're only like a $10 billion company. And it sounds funny to just say only $10 billion. But, they don't have the clout that others would have. So you have to really discuss with them. You would want to have a lengthy conversation to see, what can you do for me? How do I benefit from you supporting my contracts? You would have a deep conversation with them to find out what they can do. So.
No, thank you. So you have to be very direct with them and try and figure out whether they really can deliver and help with pricing and so forth. And somebody has to do with their own market power because, as you said, if they're a $100 billion GPO, they got a lot of market power with manufacturers.
Yeah.
But the flip side is they got to make sure it works for you, for your center.
Exactly.
So, that's great. I have one other question. You have surgeons that prefer a set block time to fill versus filling one OR before opening a second OR. Like they'd rather have a block time where they're working two different ORs. How do you move them to a more effective way of scheduling? And I'm not sure if that's a question that is, but whether it's a Margaret or Sharon question, I think one of the two of you. But how do you move your surgeons to more effective use of operating room time when they're used to having a lot of control over blocks?
Hey, Scott, this is Sharon. That is a very difficult thing to do unless the surgeon is agreeable to your suggestion. Usually surgeons agree with being flexible and moving blocks and going to condensing the schedule if it does not affect them. They shake their head yes, but they want the guy next to them to do it. So it depends. First you go to the surgeon and you show them how they can be more efficient. You show them how the center can be more efficient. You just lay out the plan for them. But ultimately, it is really up to the surgeon. You certainly don't want to run one off. And if he says absolutely not, he or she says absolutely not, this is how I want it, this is how we're going to keep it, then, we normally keep it like that. We do sometimes, though, employ a little peer pressure. If we talk about this at board meetings, sometimes the peers that are at the board meetings will chime in and try to get the surgeon to change their mind, but that doesn't always work either. So it's a very difficult situation. I think, though, that in the big picture, most surgeon partners want the center to obviously be profitable, and they want their day to run smoothly and for their cases to be expedited. And more often than not, most surgeons finally will agree for you to change their block or move them into a different OR, or sometimes move them from 2 ORs into 1 if their case volume and their turnover time, not the center's turnover time, but that surgeon turnover time, do not meet the needs of the center. And we're wasting time with 2 rooms. So as I said, it's a conversation that you must have, and whatever the outcome is usually what the surgeon says.
Well, thank you very much. I think we'll wrap up now. I want to thank Sharon, Margaret, and Ellen just for a terrific presentation. Love this kind of presentation where, even though sponsored by ASCOA, which all of you are senior vice presidents at ASCOA, and Jeff Peo, who helped to organize the call for ASCOA, who's the chief development officer, there's just a very informative educational webinar on improving operations of surgery centers. So we appreciate it greatly. If people want to reach ASCOA, Margaret, could you quickly provide contact information for people? I know it's on the webinar, but if anybody would like to reach ASCOA, great company, does a lot of operations of surgery centers, investments in surgery centers, managing them. Our team has their contact information as well. But Margaret, could you share real quickly?
Absolutely. Our main number is 781-826-6610, and you can reach any of us at that number, and we're happy to also answer anyone by email, first initial, last name at ASCOA.com.
Right, and that's ASCOA, ASCOA.com. So Sharon, Margaret, Ellen, thank you so much. Jeff as well, and then Leah from our team for organizing and facilitating. Thank you, and thank you to everybody who joined us. We'll wrap up now, and just a pleasure listening to you, and just really helpful, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, guys. We'll talk shortly. Thank you.